In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at the first round of changes available from Tenancy Services in New Zealand. Now, this only applies to people in New Zealand, so if you're outside of New Zealand, this doesn't apply to you. So Tenancy Services in New Zealand has provided some APIs, which means that we can now lodge our bond electronically. At the moment, you can only lodge your bond. You can't do refunds or anything else, but hopefully in future we'll get that functionality as well. The good news is we no longer need the bond lodgement form. We don't need to get signatures or complete bond lodgement forms anymore. So before we start, there's a couple of things that we should ideally do. On the property details screen, we should specify the number of bedrooms on the property. And on the tenant details screen, there's a number of pieces of information that we need that you're probably filling in anyway. We need a tenancy start date. We need to know what the current rent amount is. We need to know the bond amount, and for this we use extra charges. So you should create an extra charge with the amount of the bond that you want, and the description should be just bond. And probably the most important is we need to know who the tenants are. So this is on the contacts. So each tenant that you want on the bond lodgement should be created as a contact in here. And ideally, they would have an email address that Tenancy Services can contact them via email. You can create some additional contacts that are not part of the tenants on the bond lodgement, and we can show how to remove those later. So now that we've got all that information on the tenant details screen set up, we can start lodging our bond. And all of it is done via the bond deposit tab here. It's all done in this box at the bottom of this bond tab, New Zealand Tenancy Services box. Now, before we can start lodging any bond, we have to register with RealMe. So we need a RealMe account. So I'll click this button and we'll open up a browser window automatically, which goes to the RealMe account. Now, if you don't have a RealMe account, you can use this button over here to create a RealMe account. But if you've already got one like I have, we can just fill in our username and password, choose the login button to connect our RentHQ account to your RealMe account. Okay, so that's now complete, and it tells us that we now need to restart our RentHQ. So I'm going to close this browser, go back into RentHQ, and I'm going to close RentHQ and start again. Okay, so I've now restarted RentHQ, I've finished my RealMe connection, and I'm now ready to continue lodging my bond. So I'll go back into the tenant details screen again, to the bond tab again. You'll notice the register with RealMe button is now gone. I don't need that anymore. We should only have to do that once. Now I can actually start lodging my bond. So I click the Lodge Bond button. Now, before I can lodge my bond, I first of all have to register a landlord. I need a landlord ID. Even if you have a previous landlord ID, you need to get a new one under this new digital system. So I can register either, the landlord is either my property management company, which means that if you're a property management company, all your properties will probably be under the same landlord ID, which is basically registering it as the RentHQ account. Or what you can do is you can choose to register it as the property owner. So if you're a private landlord, then you'd probably choose the property owner option. So we can choose either one of these as our landlord. We can also do a mixture of them if you're a property management company, but you also have some properties that you own yourself. So you can mix them. So I'm going to choose to register the property owner, and I need to choose the register landlord button down here. Now, RentHQ will try to fill in as much information as it can based on information it already has. So this information here comes from the owner details screen, and this here comes from the primary contact on the owner details screen. But you can modify all this information before sending it to Tenancy Services. So when I push this button down here, we're going to submit this and send it to Tenancy Services. So that's been successfully lodged, and now we have to wait for Tenancy Services are going to send us an email, and that can take some time because they have to manually check a few things. Now when the email does arrive, it'll look something like this one here. The important information here is we've got our landlord ID and we've also got our landlord contact ID. So we need those two pieces of information. So I'm going to go back into RentHQ, choose the Lodge Bond button again, choose the property owner, and now I can choose to enter in that landlord ID and landlord contact ID. So the landlord ID always starts with LNL and the landlord contact always starts with LLC. Obviously your numbers will be different to mine, but I can now continue now that I've got those. So I can't lodge my bond until after I've registered my landlord and got my landlord ID back. So now I'll choose next. Now we enter information about the property, the dwelling type, so I'm going to say it's a house. If I say it's a room, then I need to actually specify which room number it is, but I'm just going to say it's a house. Number of bedrooms, this actually comes off the property details screen, as does the address of the property comes off the property details screen as well. Choose next. Now we have our weekly rent amount, the tenancy start date and the number of people, and if we want to we can also specify whether we comply with Healthy Homes Standard. That's optional. Next we have information about the tenants themselves. So this is the people that we want to register on the bond as being the tenants on the bond. So this here comes from the contacts on the tenant details screen. And if there are some on there that I don't want, I can choose to remove them. But if these details are not correct, the email address or phone number, I'll need to go back to the tenant details screen to add them in correctly. I'll choose next. Next we have the total amount of the bond that we're expecting. So this comes from the extra charge that I talked about. And we have to specify how much are we paying right now for this bond. So quite often we might pay the bond as a full amount, but sometimes we might do it in installments. But I'm going to say I'm going to do the full amount. The statement reference down here. Now if I choose to use internet banking, the statement reference must match this one here because we're going to send this statement reference to Tenancy Services. So when we make our internet banking payment, we must use that same reference so that we can match up our payment with what we've sent to Tenancy Services. Now RentHQ automatically fills in this for us with the tenant code followed by a three-digit number, a three-digit random number. So in this case, my tenant code is demo, which is just up there, and then the three-digit random number afterwards, but we can change that to anything you like. Down here we have to choose a payment method. We can either use direct debit, which is basically internet banking, and if you use that options you'll get an email with instructions on how to complete the payment. That's direct credit, or we can choose direct debit, in which case we need Tenancy Services, we need to set up a direct debit payment authority with Tenancy Services. But I'm going to choose direct credit for this one, and now down here I'm going to choose to submit that to Tenancy Services. So that bond lodgement has been successfully registered. Now again we have to wait for an email to arrive from Tenancy Services, and this email will look like this one. So it has our SAM landlord ID, it has a request number, and it also has some payment instructions which are not on this picture here, but there will be some payment instructions with bank account numbers and other things that we need to follow. So now we need to go and do our internet banking and to actually make the payment to Tenancy Services following the instructions on that second email. Once we've paid, we'll get another email from Tenancy Services. So once the payment's gone through and it's been matched up by Tenancy Services, we'll get another email that looks a bit like this one. So this one here, we have a lodgement request number and we also have our bond number. So I can put these two numbers here into RentHQ to find out more about that bond. So back in here, I'm going to put the lodgement request number, which always starts with LDG. And I'm going to do the bond number as well because I've got it now. Now I can check the status of this lodgement by pressing this button here. So it tells me this one is completed. It's got information about that the tenants, the tenant property location. I also check details about the bond itself with that bond number. So we can see that I've got $1,000, we've paid $1,000, it's active, so it hasn't been paid, it hasn't been refunded or anything, it's still active. So there you have it, that's how we lodge our bond with Tenancy Services. Hopefully in future we'll get additional functionality like refunds, but at least for now we can get rid of those bond lodgement forms.